Thank you to our channel sponsors, Jet.Build. If you're looking for ways to better manage your real estate development and construction projects, look no further. Jet is the command center software for end-to-end real estate development and construction management. That's www.jet.build. Welcome, BJ. Thanks so much for joining us today, man.
Adam, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Where are you calling in from? Where's home base for you?
We are just outside Philadelphia in Haddonfield, New Jersey.
Awesome. So I'm guessing you cross states pretty much daily?
I don't. I live and work in the same town, so small town USA. But yeah,
That's cool.
When I'm on the road, I'm all over the place.
Got you. Yeah, got you. Before we kick off, I want to have two plugs. One is it's awesome to kind of reciprocate, right? I was on your podcast, now you're on mine, so that's really awesome to have. Then I'll give you the opportunity to plug in what you're doing with your show. And second is, I found it funny. I was kind of self-reflecting after recording our episode on your show when you asked a little bit about my service, and I have this like natural hesitation to like dive in and switch that kind of mindset. And it dawned on me that, it's funny because that's exactly what I'm trying to create the space for with this show. So I wanted to call myself out and, just give you that kind of nudge to say, this is the space to talk about service, to be proud of it, and, dive deep to the extent that you can. I just wanted to have that call out.
Well,
awesome.
I appreciate the shout out, inspiring people and places. So I'll do a little self promotion there. Check it out if you have not.
Absolutely.
And yeah, I very much believe that military experience and in particular military leadership is, I think, beneficial to probably every industry, but in particular our industry in the built environment, where firefighting and problem solving and pushing and leading people every day is really the nuts and bolts of the job. So I'm excited to explore that space with you.
Absolutely, man. Awesome. So I'm going to give a formal introduction. BJ Kramer is a former active duty engineer officer with experience in both combat engineering operations and military construction programs. BJ is the host of the Inspiring People and Places podcast and president and CEO of MCFA. He has over a decade of leadership and management experience in military operations, business development, organizational management, systems engineering, strategy, construction management, and real estate investment and development. BJ is focused on solidifying MCFA's business base while also looking at new and different ways to expand their services and client base. BJ is consistently challenging his team to think bigger and smarter to bring the most value to their clients and their projects. BJ, I had the opportunity to meet with some of your team, and I got to say, you're doing an awesome job. You got a really, really awesome team, and I want to congratulate you on building that business.
I appreciate it, brother.
Absolutely.
We're just getting started, I think, but yeah, I appreciate the kind words, and it's one person, one project, one client at a time. So
Totally.
It's exciting.
Yeah, it is. All right. So before we get into the business segment, as our audience knows, we like to kick off with childhood, where you grew up and what led you in childhood to your service.
All right. Let's hit the top of the waves here. I grew up, I was born in Philadelphia, 2 weeks old. I moved. My father was in the Air Force, and we moved to California for him to go to navigator training. He was a navigator on C-130s as both a reservist and an active reservist for my life. So I grew up around the military from that perspective. Grew up just outside. Then we moved back. Grew up in Philadelphia, and then just outside Philadelphia in the New Jersey suburbs here. Was a pretty good student. Was a pretty good athlete. Ended up focusing in on swimming. Got recruited to swim in college. Looked at all of the academies were at the top of my list, as were a couple of other schools. ROTC or a military academy was really the path that I had chosen for myself probably because I had been exposed to so much military service. My dad deployed to Desert Storm when I was very young, and then we were around it. He had a lot of military academy grad buddies, a lot of ROTC buddies, so he certainly pushed us in that direction. From an exposure standpoint, ended up getting the opportunity to have got an appointment to the United States Military Academy at West Point. Went to West Point, graduated in 2004. Obviously, 2004, 9/11 happened while we were there. Our sophomore year, or beginning of our sophomore year. Actually, today, May 29th, is 20 years since my graduation day,
Wow.
May 29th, 2004. So, I mean, that's the quick and dirty story of how I got into the military. Graduated from West Point, got commissioned second lieutenant. Time of war. You want me to go into that part, or I got any clarifying questions?
Yeah, even before, moving forward there. First of all, congrats on that anniversary. That's a pretty, that's great timing. Obviously, I didn't know that before we scheduled today, so that's cool.
Me neither.
Yeah, nice. So talk to us about, I've come to understand that the process of getting accepted into West Point is pretty rigorous. So talk to us a little bit about that.
So the process, it's like a job interview. So you have to pass a physical. You're getting a physical aptitude test. You're getting an academic aptitude test, obviously through your SATs or ACTs. You have to get a appointment from doing interviews with senators and congressional nominee. So there's a more rigorous pipeline than a typical school. And I don't know what the percentages are. I don't think I'd get in today. And swimming, certainly being a college athlete, was certainly a differentiator for me. So that probably got me over any academic hump I wasn't making it by with.
So yeah, awesome. So walk us through, a little bit what it was like at West Point.
Gray. It's West Point is just north of New York City. Gray buildings, gray skies, 6 months of the year, and pretty challenging. I mean, each year you get a little bit more freedom, a little bit more flexibility, but certainly a rigorous academic load, a rigorous kind of military augmentation of exposure to military training and military disciplines. And then, as every cadet and athlete is the saying. So whether you're playing intramural sports, club sports, or varsity sports, which are called core squad sports, you have a pretty hectic life and a pretty tough load. All of it preparing you really to be able to, now manage a business, but manage kind of a dynamic environment that our military is asked to go lead in. Looking back though, you remember the camaraderie, you remember the good times, you remember kind of the highs, and you forget about the lows pretty quickly going through it. You're commiserating about the lows all the time. So my experience looking back is way different than maybe my mom's experience, having gone through it on the other end of a phone, and me wanting to punch out and quit every now and then.
Such as experience with a lot of things that revolve around hardships, right? It's looking back, you get those benefits versus the day-to-day grind of it. Yeah, that's
totally
cool. So
easy. Nothing worth accomplishing is easy, right?
Right. Exactly. Well, so what I've also understood is during summers there's like different programs. Did you do anything kind of that stand out just in your memory?
I mean, so you have cadet basic training, which is Beast Barracks. That's like our boot camp. Cadet field training, which is between freshman and sophomore year. That's standard. I got to do air assault school. I got to do kind of the CTLT program, which is like you go out to a military unit. I did that at Fort Lewis. What else stands out to me?
I mean, those two
I
things are
think
pretty.
those are,
Those are pretty awesome. I'm happy.
the,
Yeah, happy you remembered that.
yeah. I mean, looking back, like I said, everything was a great experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I talk about this a lot in my company. Like, experiences happen day to day, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they really happen over the arc of an experience. So that 3 weeks there, that 2 weeks there, that 3 month project over there, that 6 month, like that's where things start to stack up and those experiences start to compound.
Mm-hmm.
So and when you look back on them, you're remembering moments of those experiences. So I remember as much about going out to Lake Washington for my CTLT trip to Fort Lewis with 3 lieutenants, skiing, as I do of any of like the actual Army stuff that I was doing
Right.
while I was out there.
Right.
So
I totally hear you. That's a cool concept to think about, just generally speaking, for life. So through this degree at West Point, what was the kind of, I don't know, aha moment per se that brought you to engineering?
um, it's more of a funny story. Systems engineering. I majored in systems engineering.
Mm-hmm.
So the real reason I took it was it sounded more like general problem solving, and it was almost closer to a business degree
Mm-hmm.
than most of the engineering tracks at West Point. So systems engineering is really teaching you how to think about problems more than it is giving you depth in a technical skill set. So it's not civil engineering, it's not mechanical engineering, although the concepts could be applied. And it really it seemed less uh, rigorous,
Mm-hmm.
honestly, at the time, or maybe I was more attracted to it because it seemed more holistic, and it blends in, I think, a little bit of soft skills or strategic thinking with technical skills and what feels more academic to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then
So
at the same time, I was an engineer. I got to branch engineering as an engineer officer.
mm-hmm.
What attracted me to that again was this concept of it's problem solving more than it is just troop leading.
Mm-hmm.
So an engineer officer, they used to say when you had the castle on your collar, like, hey, the commander's going to be looking for the castle on the collar. They're looking at you to help figure out the problem set. Not so it's not just infantry, but it is infantry. It's not just um, logistics, but it is logistics, and an engineer officer really helps solve all of those things for a commander. So it's kind of a breadth of exposure to different problem
Mm-hmm.
sets that attracted me to it.
Yeah, that is really interesting. That's kind of what came to mind when you explained it a little bit, and obviously as you continued explaining what systems engineering is, that sounds really interesting. So before we continue into graduating and then getting to your unit, a question that whatever popped in my mind that I forgot to ask is, did your dad talk about his service to you growing up, or it was simply like exposure to it, obviously by virtue of him
Uh,
being enlisted?
so he was I mean, when you talk about it, I'm sure it was threaded in just about everything we did. I mean,
Mm,
we have a bit of a God, family, country mantra growing up, and service to others. Um, so I think service, giving back, um, all of those threads were tied to
mhm,
kind of every conversation we had growing up. Um, and I guess you know, the C-130, the aircraft that he flew was, you know, that and the crucifix were kind of these and keystones inside of our household.
mhm,
Um, so I think that represented the flag to us, and
mhm,
service to nation was a big deal. Specific missions and training missions and things like that. He talked to us about it, but not, nothing that stands out as like that was the moment that I knew I wanted to be. I mean, when he deployed to Desert Storm, I was ready to be a Navy SEAL at that point in time. Like, and so I think there was some level of camaraderie to military life, being exposed to it and being a son of somebody who was in the military.
Yeah, really interesting. All right, cool. So moving forward here, you get to graduation of West Point. What happens next?
So I think this is an interesting piece. We were our senior year. So there was four guys on the swim team that were seniors together: Ron Garberson, Charlie Lewis, Dennis Zelinsky, and myself. So our senior year, October of 2003, we graduated May 2004. October of 2003, Dave Bernstein, who was a senior on the swim team when we were freshmen, was killed in action. He was the first West Point grad lost in Operation Iraqi Freedom. And I think that sent a message to a lot of us that, like, oh shit, this is real. Obviously 9/11, we declare the war on terrorism. We kind of knew what we were getting into, but I think that war was still kind of a concept, not so much it was not as real to us. When he was killed, I think that sent maybe the entire Corps of Cadets kind of into a new reality, but us in particular, because he was a senior when we were freshmen, and that was somebody we knew. So we committed to getting commissioned. You graduate from West Point, and on the same day you get commissioned. Different events though. So the four of us got commissioned together at Dave Bernstein's gravesite.
Wow.
So I think that's it's May 29th. Memorial Day was just this past weekend. I think it's worth reflecting on that, and there's a theme coming here. Did I hit something?
No, yeah, no. Thank you for sharing that story. That's an amazing story.
Oh.
No, yeah, I hear you. Okay.
Sorry, I thought my computer froze there. All right.
No problem. Yeah, beautiful story. Thank you for sharing that.
So it gets more complicated. I graduate. I get to go to Officer Basic Course, Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. I actually got to come back to West Point as what's called a graduate assistant or athletic department intern. Basically a second lieutenant that can be a little bit of a buffer between the cadets when they're traveling and what's going on in cadet world and the athletic department. So got to do that for 6 months. And then in June, I got to my platoon at Fort Hood, Texas. So I got there. We knew we were deploying. It was a brigade that was being stood up. We spent the summer doing all kinds of deployment training exercises. And September, let me think about through this. September, we were redeploying. There was talk of us going to, was it Hurricane Katrina had just happened. So there was talk of us either deploying there and maybe being pivoted from our deployment. And we end up staying the course. So we're scheduled to deploy December of 2005. September, we go to our last training exercise. Before I leave for my training exercise, my buddy calls me, Dennis Zelinsky. He was getting ready to deploy. Be safe. He's one of the four that graduated, or that we graduated and commissioned together. November 19th, 2005, Dennis was killed in Beiji, Iraq, roadside bomb. And that's 2 weeks before I'm deploying. So another shock to the system, another slap of reality. This shit's real. I want to say something like December 5th, I'm at his funeral eulogizing him. And then December 10th, I'm deploying into the theater. So again, with Memorial Day kind of in my head and on my heart, but Dave Bernstein passing and then Dennis passing. Dennis's passing really kind of shifted my perspective and my mindset, and I think you bury that grief and you go and do the mission. But then when you come back, you kind of like, hey, whether it's PTSD, Survivor's Guilt, any of that stuff that you kind of work through and deal with, I think worth saying on your podcast, like that shit is real.
Mm-hmm.
PTSD is real, and there's no shame in working through that stuff.
Yeah.
So let me. I know I went deeper than probably expected, but I think it's worth mentioning because the veteran community is struggling with that right now, and I think normalizing it is a good thing. So December 2005, I do route clearance as a platoon leader in Iraq, roadside bombs, IED hunting. We were fielding some new equipment, the Buffalo, but our mission was to drive down roads, main supply routes, alternate supply routes. This was when the FOBs were being broken up and we were creating and standing up outposts. So we were clearing logistics routes to get to outposts. We had Navy SEALs attached to us. We were putting Navy SEALs on sniper positions of hot IED spots on those main supply routes. I mean, we were getting out of vehicles, kicking indoors. I mean, you name it, we were doing it in central Baghdad at a time when it was I'll use the word dynamic. It was an interesting time.
Yeah. Yeah.
I redeployed from Iraq, so I spent a year there. Lots of lessons learned. Leading people in combat, I think, is about as emotionally challenging and rewarding as you can get. I redeployed. I was the XO at the time and sort of quasi company commander for a period there. Went to grad school, got the opportunity. Well, went to the captain's career course while I was there. Got to go to grad school. Got to grad school, and I was supposed to have return rights. I was supposed to be taking command of the same unit I had just left. Turns out the command queues are full. You're going to go be on brigade staff likely for the next, however long, because the command queues are so deep. I took a little bit of a risk and started communicating with the Army Corps of Engineers commanders and kind of networking my way to some interviews, and then ended up getting by name requested for a Corps of Engineers job. So what was going on at the time was base realignment and closure, BRAC, huge military construction spend. It was BRAC 2005. Dollars were actually getting spent probably 2006, 7 into congressionally mandated. It had to be spent by September of 2011. So I got this opportunity to go be a resident engineer, essentially a project manager, construction manager on a $1 billion military construction program, research and development labs. They were, the command there is C5ISR. CCOM is the command. C5ISR was the campus. Basically, all of the R&D that goes into computers. I won't get all 4 C's right, but computers and intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance type R&D technology. So unbelievable campus, unbelievable construction project. I'm like the 10th guy on site. We end up having an 80-person construction management office. Tompkins, Turner, Grunley, and Kinsley has their 80-person construction management office on the general contractor side. Original projects, I think $1.2 billion. We end up having an entire program in the $2 billion range. I mean, anything that you could possibly get exposed to on a construction project, I got exposed to. So a little bit of baptism by fire. It allowed me to be a leader without having a ton of the technical background or education, and really gave me appreciation for like, hey, just bringing military leadership and people skills to the built environment is like, there's value there. And that has really been the arc of the rest of my, my career. And I'll talk about coming to MCFA and all that. But really the mindset that I found out there was, you may not know tactics, techniques, and procedures of construction per se, but you've got the ability to bring experts around you, to bring experience around you, and to lead teams, and, for lack of a better word, get shit done.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. So, I mean, first of all, thank you for sharing your experience in, losing comrades, right? People that you really grew up with through the system from West Point, same unit, et cetera. So appreciate you sharing that, going to the depth that you did. PTSD and dealing with grief is certainly a real thing. So yeah, this is the space to talk about it and normalize. So thank you. In terms of, getting back from that deployment, where was that graduate school? What was that like?
Okay, so we came back to Fort Hood, Texas. The captain's course is at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, and they have a co-op program. I'll call it a co-op program. I don't know if that's the official term, but with what was University of Missouri Rolla, now Missouri University of Science and Technology. So while you're going through the captain's course, you do some night courses. One of which was strategic human resource management, which I thought it probably shaped my view of the talent equation inside of business. I think there's a lot to be unpacked there. So you take night courses during the captain's course, and then you get a 6-month where you're essentially a full-time student taking on a course load. So it was a 1-year master's degree program. The first 6 months was co-op. The next 6 months was kind of a heavy load of graduate courses.
And what was the captain's course like?
Again, you look back on these things and you remember, like, hey, I remember playing beer pong at the, at somebody's house or whatever. It's fun because you get to be just a group of peers again. So there's not as much pressure. Like, being a student is fun and being with peers is fun. So there's not rank. There's not any of the, it's a nice break from regular Army.
Right. So, I mean, I'd imagine that coming back from, that deployment, you said Afghanistan, or did I? Iraq. Yeah. So getting back from that deployment in Iraq, and kind of not being with the team that you were leading, was that kind of, I don't know, hurtful, or for lack of a better word?
No, I think I was pissed at first that, you want to take your guys back, but you also recognize needs of the Army. It's a big Army out there. Like, hey, what's the next assignment the Army's going to give you, or what's the next mission? It's kind of like focus on whatever's next.
Yeah.
So I've always been able to accept change pretty quickly.
Yeah, I mean, that's great headspace to have. Yeah. Well, so, talk to us about that networking thing that you did to get to this construction management scenario.
So we'll get to this at the end, but I think I read somewhere, probably, a book or two. There was a little bit of me prepping for the private sector anyway. I was like, I still was undecided whether it was going to be career Army or not. There's a whole story there, but there's a bit of like advocate for yourself, network. And, I had heard this terminology like, oh, this person got a by name request. And I'm like, what the hell is a by name request? A by name request is essentially somebody goes to bat for you and says, hey, I've got an assignment open and I know the person I want in the assignment. Well, I was like, I wonder if there's any way to get a by name request to a Corps of Engineers unit, because the Corps of Engineers is like, if I can be an engineer officer, if I'm not taking my company back to, I'm not taking command to go back to Iraq, I might as well try to take the bull by the horns and see if I can navigate myself a by name request. I would be so curious to see what my emails were to some of these commanders, because I was basically cold calling as a first lieutenant. Maybe I had made captain at this point. No, I made captain when I got there. So, all right, I'm a captain, basically cold calling all of these 06s, full bird colonels, up and down the East Coast. Like, hey, I'm an East Coast kid. I'm an engineer officer. I'm in grad school right now. Got a job. I'm sure I was a little more polished than that, but probably not a ton more polished. And the lesson learned is take a shot.
Yeah.
And I took a shot. I ended up getting 2 interviews. I went to see them, and essentially, without knowing it, my timing was just right place, right time, because base realignment and closure, like I was saying, was going on. And the Corps of Engineers commanders were overwhelmed, and they're like, shit, if I could have a captain doing this stuff, like have like a local presence down here, that would be great. So there's some back and forth between the Baltimore and Philadelphia district as to where I would land, whose command I would go under. End up at Philadelphia district. I'm a Philadelphia native. I'm fired up. My wife is in grad school she's my girlfriend at the time, is in grad school in Baltimore. It was like,
Wow.
God painted that picture or wrote that story before I had it. So it's pretty cool.
That's amazing, man. I mean, it's exactly what you said. Is you got to take a shot, and who knows what will happen. Super happy to hear that. Yeah, super happy to hear that worked out. That's so cool. Awesome. So you're on this project, this $1 billion to $2 billion research center. Where is that being built?
Yeah, Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland. So BRAC was base realignment and closure. So Fort Monmouth, which had been the C4ISR community and the CCOM headquarters, they basically were closing down Fort Monmouth and shifting all of those missions down to Aberdeen, Maryland. So we were building the campus that they were going to transition to, and all kinds of crazy space. I think, and there was a time when I knew these statistics off the top of my head. I think it was 7 buildings, 2 hard stands, over 1 million square feet of space. Most of it was R&D lab space. Some of it was admin. I mean, it was, you saw there was auditoriums, there was green roofs, there was geothermal wells. It was pretty much at the height of like LEED. And I think BRAC even had a requirement that everything had to be LEED certifiable, not LEED certified, meaning the design concept had to be based on some level of LEED points.
Right.
So I got exposed to kind of all kinds of different technical problem sets. And really, again, this goes back to probably my overarching philosophy. I didn't have the time or the bandwidth or the education to become the expert in any of it. I really had to become the expert in understanding how these problems impact the project and how these resources and skill sets around me help navigate these problems.
Sounds like systems engineering.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking as you're describing it. Wow, that's really cool. So, what was the time frame of that project? How long did that take?
So that was I think I got on site March of 07. I got off active duty August 17th, 2010, and I was able to stay on as a project manager consultant for another year to help close that project out.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. So what was it like? I'm really curious about this. What was it like working, now, especially since you had both sides of it, working as a military profession with civilian profession, and then also switching into the civilian perspective?
So I was the only guy showing up to work in a uniform every day. Everybody else was in kind of jeans and collared shirts. So it's typical construction site with this one captain. So I think I had built relationships enough that there was nothing about my uniform that was, I wasn't trying to be Patton on the construction site. I was very much a leader, but I was so curious about everything that it was really, it was kind of a casual environment that I was walking back into. It wasn't like, oh, look at this guy now. He thinks he's, you know, it was just, you were just a guy that was part of the team wearing a different shirt the next day. So
yeah,
it was a great experience.
I'm surprised to hear that. Is that typical for any relevant type project?
That I was able to come back in the next day in a different capacity.
No, I mean, I guess in terms of the formality or lack thereof, right? People not in uniform, for example, that casual kind of atmosphere.
So if you think of it, I represented the owner in many ways, but
Okay.
I was really representing the construction agent. So the Army Corps of Engineers is the construction manager for military construction projects. The mission really is the owner, because they're the ones that are going to live and work in the buildings. And there's many stakeholders involved in these types of programs. So I think that a high functioning team, it should not be about rank. It should be about roles, responsibilities, and getting the job done. And I think I had a skill set that was, it wasn't about being in charge or being the boss. It was really about everybody, kind of taking their role and seeing it to fruition. So in uniform, I had become a bit of a liaison, and a bit of a bit of a problem solver leader. I was able to handle some of the problems that maybe was outside of the scope of anything, like run it to ground. And I think I just continued that. It was almost like I was the special project officer on the job.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I think at least for me, right, when you said, you're kind of representing the owner, that now makes a lot of sense to me in terms of where you were in that position. That's an awesome exposure set and ability to be hands-on or hands-off. That's really cool.
Baptized by fire, it really set the stage for the rest of I think the rest of my career, and certainly the immediate next chapters.
Amazing. So, before we start getting into the end of your enlistment, which you just, kind of touched on there as you shifted to a, representative per se, consultant. Before we get there, I heard you mention having considered civilian life while being enlisted. I'm curious how that, came to mind, because I think it's a really important thing to highlight for, our listeners, especially those that are active duty.
I think anybody that's a planner, which I certainly am, and if you have any level of downtime or deployment time where all you do is think about your future and try to keep yourself excited for when you get home, you start thinking about what's next. And with my service academy obligation and my grad school obligation, that put a milestone out there. Hey, I graduated in 2004. 2010 is your first opportunity to make a decision to get off active duty or not. So in doing that, you want to have some level of thought process and some level of optionality in where you're going, because route clearance in central Baghdad is not exactly a transferable skill to the marketplace. The soft skills of leadership and troop leading and mission planning and problem solving in a dynamic environment is, but being a Corps of Engineer officer was like, if I can't go be in command, which to me that was the job I wanted, then I might as well go get some. I'm an engineer officer. What are all my options? And not everybody's going to not everybody is going to get the job that they want. I got lucky by taking the shot and advocating for the Corps of Engineers job. But in my mind, it was like, oh man, I'm in grad school right now. If I could get a Corps of Engineers assignment, that's going to at least get me into construction. And I have a little bit of this vision to be in real estate development. I don't know if that real estate development is going to be next year or at the end of my career, but I was curious. So I think being honest about what you're curious about and knowing that you can be curious about career paths while maintaining your existing job.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. So
man, excuse me.
you touched on some translatable skills that we'll dig into in a bit, but that kind of concept that you brought up, right? Be willing to engage with your curiosities for the next stage in your life, right? In your career, from military to civilian and profession, really
Yeah,
important.
and you don't know what you don't know. So the only
Right.
way, like, I would read a lot, and I would be looking at when I'm reading, and then you read an anecdote about this guy at Nike or this guy at GE or Warren Buffett, and you start thinking like, oh, what are career paths out there? Like, the only thing I knew was the Army. My dad was in the Air
Mm-hmm.
Force, and I knew the Army, so I knew what the officer, you know, stepping stones and what that ladder looked like, but I didn't really have. I for I went from high school into the military basically,
Mm-hmm.
and for a 9-year to 10-year path, my my path was set for me.
Mm-hmm.
All of a sudden, you start reading about things and you start getting curious about, well, what would that path look like? What would that path look like? And entrepreneurial itch was probably somewhere inside of me. So I was just curious.
Yeah, that's awesome. Really important point to highlight in general for our listeners. Yeah, so thank you for digging into that. All right, so it sounds like we got to the end of your enlistment, and before we close out the military side, I'm curious what your feelings are, thoughts are in hindsight, having a deployment, in war zone effectively versus working, stateside on a construction job. Like, how did that, opposite atmosphere kind of play into, I don't know, your overall experience enlistment?
Um, I guess I've never really compared them. It was
Mm,
like, this is the job that's in front of you that the Army gave you. Go use your skills to add value. And
mm-hmm,
in a wartime, again, I I think the key skill, gift, passion is getting the most out of other people, and
mm,
being and I think of that as leadership. I love people. I really do. I love teams and bringing people together to perform. So I go back to my technical skills are probably pretty wide, not super deep. I'm I know enough to know how much I don't know,
mm-hmm,
technically, is
mm-hmm.
probably a good way of saying it, and
Yeah.
therefore to rely on subject matter experts and to really value subject matter experts. Like,
Mm-hmm.
people that are truly great and gifted at their craft, I value, and bringing them together to perform, I value. So whether that's bringing a group of soldiers and NCOs together to go do route clearance and try to bring everybody home from war, or go on a project site, I just saw myself as like, oh, you're in a leadership role, go execute.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I, when you challenge me, I look back and I'm like, well, I had my girlfriend down the street from me. I was in Baltimore. I got to hang out on the weekends. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not really comparing the job. I'm really comparing the environments.
Right.
And, it doesn't take much comparison to say not being in a war zone
Right.
is way better than being in a war zone.
Well, I mean, yeah, yeah, totally. But the real answer to that was how you described your, headspace, attitude toward, being on that construction site, which is to just, you know, make the most impact that you can in the position that you're at. And I think that's an amazing headspace to have. So, yeah, great chair. Awesome to hear that. And moving forward now to, finishing your enlistment and then shifting into that civilian role as a consultant to finish that project. How long? What was that process like? How long did that last?
So, like I said, I was kind of the special project officer. even in uniform, I was a bit of a confidant to the key leader, the program manager, on that. So it was just kind of right place, right space, right time, and there was a contract that the company that had the contract was we had some synergy and some relationship, and they were tapped as like, hey, would you consider hiring BJ? They said we would be delighted to, and they saw me as kind of a key leader to help them grow their company. So I had this 50-50 hat. Half of it was helping support the program and close out the project, and the other half was helping support this company and starting to grow. And it really was a unique blend of business development and doer project management. And it was a great foot out the door.
That's really amazing. And I want to like take that half step back and highlight the fact that this all happened because you just simply took a chance, right? I mean, you didn't have anything to lose by just asking to get involved with this project, and that's the result of it.
For sure.
Thank you to our channel sponsors, Jet.Build. If you're looking for ways to better manage your real estate development and construction projects, look no further. Jet is the command center software for end-to-end real estate development and construction management. That's www.jet.build. Welcome back to part 2 of the Veterans Who Build show with BJ Kramer. We are here in the most on-brand possible moment we can, kicking off second part of the episode while BJ is in reserve duty. As you can see, for those who are watching, he's sitting there in uniform. BJ, thanks so much, man, for joining us in this setting.
Yeah, happy to be here. I might have to put out the disclosure. All comments are those of mine, not of the U.S. military, even though I'm in uniform. Just wrapped up the day here at in Army Reserve land, so I can go into what I do here. But
yeah.
But yeah, first, let me apologize for the part 2. Busy schedules. We got squeezed on the last one, and I end up talking too much. So great to be back.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm actually happy, as I mentioned on that little intro there. Happy that it worked out this way because we get to have you in uniform on video. So that's awesome. I'm excited for just that kind of an atmosphere. So where we had left off, and you had rightfully corrected me, is the end of your enlistment, which in your case, given you're an officer, it's end of your commission as an officer. Happy for you to explain that, and also just kind of recap the end of your time on active duty.
Yeah, so the quick clarification is enlistment refers to those enlisted soldiers and non-commissioned officers, and then commissioned officers, whether through ROTC, Officer Candidate School, or a military academy. Our service time is basically our commission. So when we retire, we resign our commission versus ending our enlistment. As we can talk, when I went off active duty, I resigned my active duty commission and took on a reserve commission. So I've been in the reserve since getting off active duty in 2010. And I'll give you a quick arc on that. So like I said, end of my active duty time was with the Corps of Engineers, which opened up, kind of my eyes to this whole built environment world, having managed a $2 billion construction program with kind of many stakeholders, many general contractors, and a whole bunch of engineering and owners rep support staff. That really opened my eyes and opened the doors to the world that I spend most of my time in now as the CEO of MCFA. But I kept the reserve commission for a number of reasons. Actually, a Corps of Engineers officer. He was a West Point grad, Corps of Engineers employee, and a reserve colonel put his arm around me. He's like, "Hey, look, you're getting off active duty, but you don't have to stop your service." So for I'll call it a combination of service and you know, I said to you, it's kind of nice to put the uniform on and in all honesty, have my kids see me in uniform because I think it represents so much around service and service to the country and service before self that me talking about it is one thing, but them seeing me do it is another thing. So I'm happy that they get to see it. And there's certainly some financial incentives and retirement benefits to seeing out a 20-year career. And I've had some cool assignments of note. I served in a FEMA unit, so did some disaster management, disaster response as a part of the defense coordinating element attached to FEMA Region 3. I've been in some contingency units supporting the Corps of Engineers overseas, including doing exercises in Korea. Then I had the opportunity to teach at the Command and General Staff College, which is the Army's intermediate level education for captains and majors. So combination of leadership ethics, kind of program, and how big Army works and budgets, leadership and military history. So kind of cool educational content to dive into and get to deliver. And then most recently, I've been in my current assignment as adjunct faculty up at the United States Military Academy at West Point, where it all began, teaching in the Department of Systems Engineering and supporting with some of their summer support requirements. So it's been a kind of a cool reserve arc and a way to keep my foot in that door.
That's really amazing, man. You know, first of all, I want to appreciate and highlight that piece of, you know, being an influence to your kids in a positive way, right? Around service by active doing rather than explaining, given, you know, they weren't alive yet when you were in active duty. So
yeah.
I think that's a really neat way to perceive the scenario. And I completely agree with what you had said. And then the second piece I was really kind of surprised by hearing you say was I guess the opportunity, I'll call it, that you've had through your continued reserve duty around the world, right? That's pretty amazing. I wasn't expecting to hear that. Is that like a typical situation?
I found that I've had a pretty atypical reserve career. And I think I touched on this last time we talked about there's so much opportunity in large organizations if you just kind of ask and advocate for yourself. And it was always a situation of kind of running in and networking to people and then engaging in conversation. And, you know, maybe I can't get away from a little bit of business development mindset of like, oh, what else could I be doing? Or what else could be next? And navigating my own career path, because it was always competing with what I was doing on a day-to-day basis. So there are some people that are in a position where they can treat the reserves, a part-time job, as kind of a full-time effort. I just running a business, I could never do that. And building a family, I could never do that. So the primary thing that puts food on my table is my business. So that had to be number one, you know, from a professional world. And I can't let my professional world take away from my family life. So my family is actually number one. So when you've got two number ones competing for your time, it's kind of hard to figure out where to fit that one in. And I've been lucky to have a lot of mentors kind of help me navigate a reserve career where I find some professional gratification and fulfillment, and I still can give back to the Army in a way that is of value. And when I interviewed for the job here at West Point, it was a pretty competitive process. I had not interviewed for a quote job in a really long time. And the department head that hired me was so excited about a officer that took a different path, a graduate from West Point that had taken a non-traditional path, and for me to be a resource to the cadets about, hey, what could a reserve career and an entrepreneurial business path look like out there in the world? Because every day, all day, they hear a lot about what the traditional path is. So it's been very gratifying for me.
That's amazing. You were touching on something I was thinking about, and I was about to ask you in terms of how you're able to balance, life in addition to, reserve duty. What is I guess to date, what has been your typical rotation in reserves?
I mean, the traditional is, the traditional 1 week in a month, 2 weeks a year, is kind of how they advertise it. And I think you could stick to that. I've been in assignments where it was more of like, hey, those once a month things get turned into quarterly offsites and some remote work in the hybrid environment. But it's always about, 3 weeks in a summer that you're doing an exercise or doing a commitment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense.
And to your point, you have to have either a pretty understanding employer, which some people say, well, you own the company, you got to be a pretty understanding employer. But the truth is, when you own the company, you become an even less understanding employer because you're your own worst nightmare bossing yourself around. It took me a little while to get kind of at peace and find. I read somewhere that work-life balance doesn't exist. It's really about integration and counterbalance. So it requires a really understanding and supportive wife, and a really understanding and supportive team and business partners at the company to enable me to have the flexibility and space to do it. And I think just constantly working at it and trying to compartmentalize it into pockets of time that aren't interruptive to those other two priorities, the family or the business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. These are concepts that are kind of like, I'll call it easy to understand when you just say it conceptually, but at the same time, I know how difficult it is to literally and actually do it and implement it. Congrats, man. That's really awesome that you're able to juggle the three things.
I appreciate it. It's funny you say that because you read these things in books, and it's like all of a sudden it's like walking into IKEA. You see stuff at IKEA, and it's like, oh, all of a sudden I feel like I could live this perfectly organized life, and then you get back to reality. You read it in a book, it's like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Just calendar it, and you've got it.
Exactly.
So the discipline and ongoing effort that it takes to manage and navigate my calendar is it's an interesting battle, but it starts with trying.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. No doubt. I recognize it and appreciate it. And congratulations for accomplishing it. Right. That's really awesome. So where we were ending off was, like we just mentioned, right? You were shifting from military to civilian. And before we kind of make that complete transition, and you could touch on this dynamic as we go through your kind of professional progression, but I want to give a plug right now for really that transition period, military to civilian. And now that you have hindsight, what advice would you give your former self, aka others that are in that scenario right now?
Yeah, I think the number one thing I would give my former self is don't be in a rush. And I know why everybody's in a rush, or at least I think I do, because I feel like I probably was. You've got all this pent up like excitement and energy about something new. In my case, I was spoiled with a little bit of overload of opportunity. So there was so much I thought I could do and wanted to do, and there was enough interest in my background and skill set that it was like, oh, I could go there, or I could go there, or I could go there. So then you start putting pressure on yourself for making the next or the right decision instead of the next right decision. I also think it was the combination, at 17 years old, I committed to going to West Point, and not knowing what the next 10 years were going to hold. But I had basically committed to the next 10 years of my life being committed to whatever the Army asked me to do. So again, for 10 years, I didn't have a vote. And now all of a sudden I've got all this opportunity to make a decision. I've got all this freedom around what decision I can make. And you get overwhelmed by it. You're like, oh, I got to make the next one. And then you compound that with the fact that you're joining a workforce where your peers have been in the civilian workforce for 6 years now. Mm-hmm. It's like, oh, I don't want to fall behind. I don't want to start behind. And we tend to put a whole bunch of pressure on that first step out the door. And that's not to say you shouldn't think hard about it. You shouldn't think about what you want to do or who you want to become. But we are all constantly becoming the compounding effect of all of our experiences. We are not a job title. We are not a company. We are human beings that get to gain experience, learn from those experiences, grow, and then make more decisions. So
very
I think the number one advice I would say is easy, cuz you don't got to get it all right. You're not deciding the rest of your life.
Absolutely. I mean, what you're describing is, going from this environment of structure, like ultimate structure, right? Military, to then all of a sudden you do whatever you want, whenever you want, essentially, right? Choose whatever, direction that you want to go in. Which is civilian life, essentially, no structure. So it creates that difficult dynamic of, decision or anxiety toward making that next decision, as you're putting it, right, in terms of making a choice quickly, rather than, taking a moment to think about, what you want to do, what you like to do, et cetera. You pointed out something that I find very difficult. And I haven't heard a lot of people say this. And as you said it, I reflected on my own experiences. Your peers, quote unquote, right? Those people that you grew up with or that are the same age as you, who didn't serve and have been in the workforce for that many years more than you, or past school now because they went directly through civilian life. That's a tough thing to swallow, right? To look left and right and see the same people you grew up with are now with X position or with X degree, et cetera. How did you, because you brought it up, what was your kind of thought process of pushing beyond that, ego factor?
I was dead set on finding a place where I had this combination of criteria. So I had an Excel spreadsheet with all the companies that I was interested in talking to and I was talking to, and all of the criteria that I was trying to rank them off of. And it included salary and benefits and geography and scope of work and upward mobility and, you name it. I was trying to rank it. And I think at the end of the day, I felt like I was leaving the biggest corporation in the world. I was getting offers from some mid and big corporations, and I had this entrepreneurial itch in me, but I also had this like, well, I'm kind of used to stability, and I was weighing through this. It was really trying to figure out my own risk tolerance, but I knew that I had at least made peace with the fact that I needed to be in an environment where I had the opportunity to create my upside while not totally betting on myself. So a lot of what I'm doing at my company is probably trying to build that environment that finds that saddle point for the next me. That's not to say everybody getting out of the Army is going to be entrepreneurial. They're not. A lot of people getting out of the Army are not entrepreneurial. They're like, hey, I like super structure, super discipline, steady paycheck. I had always had a bit of a quick start and a business development, marketing, connecting the dots, networking. Even in the Army, I was always trying to create. I was always looking at how do we create value, how do we make it more efficient. I'm back here at the systems engineering department. Systems engineering is about optimizing outcomes. I mean, all of that stuff was influencing the decision I was making. So I was really focused on my decision criteria. And when I boil it all down, it was getting that, maybe stable and good enough downside, right? While finding an environment that I really felt I could make an impact in, not just the bottom line, but the bottom line and the culture and my own future.
Mm. Yeah, really interesting. I love that you created that spreadsheet. I almost wish that it was like a standard spreadsheet template, for example, that was passed out to people finishing, veterans finishing their service, saying, here, fill out at least 3 columns on this spreadsheet so that you can provide yourself with some baseline of structure. So that's me saying, this is your opportunity to sell that to the U.S. military.
There you go. On one of my interviews, General McCaffrey said it comes down to 3 things: location, vocation, and compensation.
Mm.
Vocation being what is the scope of the work of what you're going to do, and then obviously location and compensation. I think it's probably a lot like the Iron Triangle and project management. Pick 2.
Mm.
And you can get them. You might not be able to get all 3, but pick pick 2 of the 3 that matter most to you. So if it's the scope of work and the geography, you might have to sacrifice comp to get the right place. But I think that's what it boils down to. And then inside of that, there's obviously hundreds of micro criteria around compensation, benefits, school reimbursement, 401k, you name it.
Great principles to just hold by as you're finishing service for any of our listeners in that stage. So well said. Love the structure around it.
And let me make a plug for. I know Jesse from my team, our chief talent officer, was on, and that's how I ended up on the show. Let me make a plug for Jesse and our team at MCFA. I mean, if anybody's looking into transitioning to the built environment, really what we're about is project leadership. And I think that's really bringing mission-focused military leadership to the built environment is what we're about. And we have the Skill Bridge program, DOD to AEC. Jesse runs that. We've got partnerships out there. I mean, we are a service-disabled veteran-owned small business, and one of the ways we get to give back to the veteran community is through that Skill Bridge program and helping veterans transition to a career path in the built environment.
Yeah, and it's an amazing program. I'm going to leave links in the show notes for anyone who's interested. You'll easily find it there. So last piece of this transition period, especially now that you're sitting here in uniform, do you find that continuing service through reserves, has that helped you in terms of just that transition, staying a little bit keyed in still?
Yeah, I think completely, because one of the things that you lose when you take the uniform off is you've taken the uniform off. I still get to suit up every now and then and remind myself, I'm still doing, I think it's the greatest calling in the world. You read statistics about men on their deathbed and their one great regret. And I see it in my 40-year-old peer group, the regret of not having served their country. So I think that there's so much fulfillment that comes from the sacrifice that we made to serve our country, and the pride that we get to represent that by putting on the uniform. And that may be ego, that may be, I don't know what you want to call that, but I have a lot of pride when I put on this uniform. I think it represents so many things about who I am, what I was willing to do, and what's inside of me. And when you take it off, you don't get to tell the world about that.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something complicated in our psyche when we take it off and we go join a company, or we go, back to the civilian world, where it's like, man, you don't know what's inside of me. I just
Mm-hmm.
left a piece of me in my closet today.
Yeah.
And I've found a lot. So without a doubt, keeping one foot in the door, even if it was, an eighth of a foot in the door, certainly enabled me to kind of have a slow breakup with that part of me.
Yeah, that all tracks. I would break it into to just bunch that into one word. I'll call it identity, right? I mean, you create a sense of identity with your service, and then if it's all of a sudden, exactly as you put it, something in your closet or like under your bed in storage, wherever, you've distanced yourself, you've lost that piece of identity. However, if you're doing reserve duty, like you're sitting there right now, you get to play with, revisiting that sense of your identity once in a while at a minimum. So yeah, that's really interesting. Really interesting to note. All right, man, amazing. So moving forward, let's start transitioning into your professional career. Talk to us about. I think you're finishing that project that you had started while you were in service, right?
Yeah. So I got really, really lucky that the project I was on in uniform, I got to leave, come back in a civilian capacity as a consultant on the project, and at the same time started doing business development for the team that I was contracted under.
Hmm.
Great ownership group, kind of understood who I was, and again, it was a little bit of that right mix of stability and predictability of what I was doing, while giving me an opportunity to flex, some entrepreneurial creativity and business development muscles. And a big lesson learned was those two things are really, really freaking different. Being a project manager on a site has a ton of responsibilities and no calendar to it. It's, projects are 5, 6, 7 days a week at times, chaos. And project management doesn't happen on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. It happens around the clock every day, emails flying. And business development is the same thing. It doesn't happen on your calendar. It happens on when the people that you're trying to meet with's calendar.
Mm-hmm.
So I learned pretty early on that you can't do both 50-50. You can't do both well. I think you could do 20% of one and 80% of the other. And I think that goes either way. You could be a 20% project manager, 80% business development. I think you could be an 80% project manager or doer and 20% business developer. But trying to be 50-50 is freaking hard. Two different sides of your brain. Your calendar is never predictable. You'll run yourself ragged. So I learned that in that experience. Luckily, at the time, I was in a position where I could be run ragged. I didn't have kids, and I was just married, and my wife had a pretty demanding job herself. So, it was work life and social life, and I was willing to sacrifice some social life to try and figure out my work life.
Mm-hmm.
I started flexing that entrepreneurial muscle. I was actually flipping my own house. So I had a real estate bug in me. I had bought real estate while I was in the Army. And I actually, as I was getting off active duty, I had bought a house to flip to myself. I was renovating a distressed property in downtown Baltimore with a partner to kind of learn the ropes from him. And my wife and I moved into that right after we got married. So I got married September 4th, 2010. I got off active duty August 17th, 2010, got married September 4th, 2010. I kind of they say job change and marriage are two of the biggest stressors that you experience in your life. So I figured, why not knock them out at the same time? And we moved into that house when we came back from our honeymoon. Highly recommend anybody that gets married, knock the dust right off of the honeymoon and try and move into your house without movers with your new spouse. That'll really challenge you, especially when it's a row home in downtown Baltimore and you've got crazy stairs angles and heavy furniture. It's teamwork makes the dream work. Gets figured out real quick.
That's a lot.
So I had this entrepreneurial bug for real estate, and I had done this, kind of pilot project on my own, using my own money for my own need. I was the investor and the buyer on the deal. And I got to know this guy and started kind of kicking tires with a partnership with him. I don't talk much about this part of my career journey, but I did the project that I was in uniform, came back, and I left that opportunity to pursue real estate development full time for about a year, and loved it. Was super successful from a project management standpoint and from a business standpoint. I was implementing systems with this partnership, and I got punched in the face a little bit, like any good entrepreneurial story. He was over leveraged, and we had talked about a profit sharing model, but I didn't realize how much debt he was carrying, and in his mind, all of that had to be paid back before profit sharing started. So I call it my 1-year MBA. Talk about what your peers are doing. Most of my peers, when they were getting off active duty, went to get their MBA as kind of the transition thing. I kind of went to the school of hard knocks and took a punch in the throat. And I don't regret one single minute of it. And to this day, I'd be thankful to the guy. There was nothing malicious about it. It just taught me a lot about like specificity and due diligence and expectation management and truly understanding business conditions. I mean, I learned more in that year, not just from the end result, but I basically ran this company like I owned it, ran these projects like they were mine. I didn't have all the capital at risk, but I did have my upside at risk. Back to my point of I was always looking for opportunities that at least, I didn't need a lot, but I needed something, right, from a salary standpoint. I was willing to go to the school of hard knocks to kind of intern to create upside for myself. I was getting ready to kind of detach from this guy and go out on my own, and I had found a really good 6 townhouse land opportunity in downtown Baltimore. I was going to do it. I was getting ready to I was starting to raise money or get interest. A gentleman I knew really well told me the multiplier on the deal wasn't rich enough for him. He was out, went to Michael Furman and John Nelson, who Michael Furman is the founder of MCFA, and started kicking tires on it. And he said, I'd be interested. He said, but what do you think about coming to work here? And it's just one of those situations where it's like, wait, all right, I live in Baltimore. MCFA is right where my hometown is, just outside Philly. My wife and I have talked about, would we ever move back at some point in time? Maybe now is the time that we're supposed to move back. 2 weeks later, she gets a call that there's a job opening at Children's Hospital in Philadelphia that somebody's trying to get her to. So stars started aligning, and it was like, all right, maybe I'm not supposed to build my own business down here. Maybe I'm supposed to go to MCFA. Wow. And in 2012, I joined MCFA, And I've been here ever since. I just had my 12-year anniversary pop up on LinkedIn to remind me how old I am.
That's amazing. How did you connect with Michael to begin with?
So MCFA was supporting the installation at Aberdeen Proving Ground, where I was supporting the Corps of Engineers as the resident engineer on that project. So MCFA was doing a lot of creative stuff, and they were doing something called enhanced use lease, which was basically real estate development on public property. And I was intrigued by them for a while. I was getting to know them over time. A gentleman I still work with, Sam Cubberly, was a major in the Army, West Point grad, 10 years before me. He was a project manager at Aberdeen Proving Ground that I had worked with when I was a second lieutenant at West Point. So there was all these kind of connections into there. And it was another one of these like, hey, that's an established company, but there seems to be some entrepreneurial spirit in there. There seems to be some room for growth there. Maybe that's a place I can jump into. And I got hired as director of business development and strategy in 2012. The war story there is I joined in June 2012, and I brought a contract and a project manager with me. So I was able to quickly at least prove myself. And in October of 2012, a lot of the work that MCFA had was from this macro spending spree around base realignment and closure. It was this macro spending spree going on in the Department of Defense around military construction projects and base realignment. Some bases are closing and other bases are getting built up and new infrastructure, all this. So MCFA had enjoyed a pretty big trajectory from startup to that point based on the wind at their back. And two things happened at the same time. The Obama administration announced sequestration, across the board cuts, budget cuts around DoD spending, and BRAC ended. So you had this macro spending spree come off a cliff, and then you had an extra cliff of sequestration. And October 2012, MCFA, that's the fiscal year. MCFA lost a lot of contracts. I'm like, oh shit, I made the wrong decision. Last guy in, first guy back out.
Right.
And lucky for me, Michael was well positioned, was very conservative, and very I'll say he was prepared for a rainy day, and told me, "You're not going anywhere. We'll figure this out." And it actually was the best thing that happened, because MCFA was really a planning, strategy, and program management company. And I was able to grow us and quickly dove into growing us into a construction management platform that has proven out to be a great complement to our business since then. So go ahead.
That's pretty amazing, to hear that, the structure of the company was conservative to the extent that government contracts just fell off a cliff, which, I don't know how many people are ever going to expect such a thing, yet still be, able to float a new employee, for example, you in the story. So that's really cool. I just wanted to kind of point that out. That's great. I don't know, future sight.
Yeah. There's a lot. I think he would wrestle back and forth with himself today of whether not whether keeping me was the right thing, but what were the right decisions at that time? Did he see those decisions coming? If he could revisit them. I mean, I wasn't the only employee that was coming off of a project, but I'm pretty sure he didn't take a salary for 6 months. And John Nelson, who you could hear him talk, he he actually left the company to try and kind of lower the impact on overhead because he had outside options. Um, I, I was protected from a lot of those discussions.
Mhm.
I basically was just like, hey, if you need me to start looking, could you give me a heads up? And
Right,
that was when he
right.
was like, you're not going anywhere.
Right.
And in that moment, he probably, I'm a pretty loyal dude, but in that moment, he probably solidified my loyalty
Mhm.
to him as a business person, and who would eventually become my future business partner.
Yeah.
Um,
Amazing.
So fast forward
Right.
to that was 2012, 2013. We're on a golf course 1 October 2013, or maybe it was 30 September, and we get a call from a project that I was pursuing, that we got it. $3 million fee job, largest fee job in MCFA history. And that sort of established our construction management arm. I'd be remiss. There was a gentleman, Steve Weber, who was in the company. He and I wrote the proposal over a Labor Day weekend. We convinced the owners that we should go after it. We could go after it. We could win it. It has all kinds of cool threads and success stories to it, but it really stabilized the company at the time. It was a great, predictably long, good revenue project, and I went and managed that. It was in Chicago. I was back and forth from Chicago and Detroit to Philly every week for the next 18 months. So business development guy that ended up, we got it. It's like, somebody has to run this. I became the project manager. We didn't have any of the staff. We didn't have, it basically was a new business unit that we stood up to execute.
Right. Because you're based on the East Coast, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So, but it's also, all of that experience is what convinces me to be so convicted about growth now. I know that we have the systems, the people, the team, the managers, the leadership, the network in place to go execute anywhere in the world if you give me 15 to 45 days. And if I have to be the first person on the ground because we maybe overcommitted ourselves, I'll be the first person on the ground to get it stood up. That's what makes me confident in who we are, what we do to this day. Was that project. So
that's amazing.
Great project, 3 years long, yada, 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 jump. We some wins, some losses, some ups, some downs. November 2017, I am at a conference with Michael, and we have a conversation about the future of the company. I give him some thoughts. We come down to breakfast the next day. He's like, hey, I agree with your thoughts. January 1st, I'm going to name you managing partner of the company. So became managing partner of the company, basically with a minority interest in the company. And over the next year, we worked and negotiated a buyout of his wife, who was getting ready to retire. So Michael and Becky founded the company in 2003, and I acquired 51% ownership from Becky in April of 2019.
Amazing, man.
And we've been on a little bit of a growth trajectory ever since. Bobbing and weaving
amazing.
out there in the marketplace.
So what is the main focus of the company today in terms of, I'll call it, service set and vertical?
Yeah. So services, we've stuck to the core services of planning, strategy, program management, construction management, and owner's rep. So we are on the owner side of the table. We don't do GC work. Every now and then we'll get called in to support a GC on a subcontract. We've dabbled in being above the GC, kind of subbing to a prime trade. We've been a sub to run kind of FF&E and fit out for GC. But for the most part, we stay on the owner side. And verticals are growing every day. We are in hospitality and healthcare. We're in defense and government. We're in transportation and infrastructure and energy. We're about as diverse of a small business. When I bought the company in 2019, we were 17 people. Today we're 67, I think, as of Monday, and that's navigating through COVID. And we've just had the luxury of getting really, really good people on our team every time we win a new job. And then, I think at least trying to be intentional about our philosophy that even though people can't be 50-50 project manager, business developer, everybody is a business developer and a recruiter. Everybody has to understand that when they're doing their job, that job is helping us earn the next job. That job likely is going to run into clients and interactions that are going to be referrals. They're going to be people that might want to come work for us. And what we're trying to do is instill a growth and a business mind in every professional inside of our company.
Yeah, I mean that's a valuable strategy for any company in any industry is to empower their employees to not only execute their jobs but also to push and produce the lead for the next potential job, whether that be with that same client or referral. So that's really amazing, man. Congratulations on that growth.
Well, it's another one of those things that sounds easier when you say it than it is.
Okay,
but we've got a number of ways that we're trying to be really intentional and create systems that constantly reinforce and promote that mindset.
Yeah, I mean, back to your, schooling, right? West Point. I think about the systems engineering that you spoke about. It's really a fascinating, psychology and just literal process for implementing into any business or even personal life. I can imagine it being useful. Something that I know I'm gonna dive into myself because I'm just very intrigued by it. That said, I want to take the opportunity now to plug in translatable skills, military to profession.
Yeah. So is that a question to me?
It's a question, yeah.
I will tell you that the one thing I learned really, really early on is everybody around you brings something to the table. And my leadership philosophy was about understanding humans that were on my team. What makes them tick? What matters to them? What are they good at? What do they love to do? And to let them know I care. I can't lead anybody who I don't understand their heart and who don't understand my heart, because I lead from my heart. So that's been the most translatable skill. And what I mean, if you take it from military sense, I had 33 dudes I was taking into combat. I was 22 years old. They had no reason to believe that they should trust me. So I spent a lot of time. I've got a good story about this. Spent a lot of time getting to know them and what made them tick and who their families were. So much so that I was probably 2 weeks into the company. I was an engineer platoon leader responsible for a combat engineering unit in a combined arms battalion. We had Bradley fighting vehicles, and new LT has to go out to the range to get qualified with his driver and gunner out on the Bradley. So 2 weeks in, I'm headed out to the range, and I'm in the Bradley with my team, shooting the shit, talking to them, and and company commander and the first sergeant come out, and company commander grabs the field manual for the Bradley fighting vehicle and starts hammering me with questions. And I'm like, not sure, sir. I don't know, sir. And he looks at me. He's like, have you even looked at this thing? No, sir. And he's like, you're responsible for 4 Bradley fighting vehicles in my command. And and you're out here at the gunnery and you haven't even cracked the field manual for this thing. It's like, what the hell are you doing? I said, well, in addition to those 4 Bradley fighting vehicles, sir, I'm responsible for 33 men who have families. So I know that Staff Sergeant Blake has 3 kids and is about to have his 4th right before we deploy. I know Jason DaCosta, who's my driver, is from Rochester, New York, and has an older sister and a grandfather that just passed away. And I go line by line of the people. I said, sir, you and I may disagree on this. I promise you my job, I understand my job is to be proficient in everything that's under my responsibility, but I got to start with the people. And the first sergeant came up to me after hearing that and said, I've never seen a second lieutenant get that so right on day one. So that is because my strength has always been people. I get energized by people. I enjoy building teams. I love helping other people succeed. So I kind of was just in a position where it was like, if I have to choose between opening a field manual in 110-degree heat out here in Fort Hood, Texas, or getting to know these guys, I'm going to start with getting to know these guys. I'm going to play to my strengths and figure out what I'm dealing with here.
Yeah.
So I think that's to me, leadership is this huge, big topic that is a transferable skill. It's like leadership means you understand how to accomplish the mission with the resources around you. And leadership means that human beings are more important than anything else. Mm-hmm. That to me is the transferable skill. I could also say I'm not afraid to do just about anything. I mean, if I have to get in the trench and dig ditches, I've done worse things. So there's nothing that's above me. So I think low ego and being willing to do whatever it takes is a pretty transferable skill. And I think that grit and scrappiness and willingness to be scrappy translates. What else translates? Planning. Just looking out in front of you and understanding like what's the mission and what's the plan. And then, whether it's battle drills or course of action analysis or the military decision-making process, all of those processes, I mean, we're actually in the process of putting our branding on those processes and translating those military processes to our project management playbook or our project leadership playbook. Things like battle rhythms that nobody understands or people don't appreciate. All those bases for how we run a mission and how we set up an operation are totally transferable to building things in the built environment.
Yeah, very well said. All of that absolutely tracks, especially for our ecosystem in the built environment. And yeah, thank you for sharing that story. That's a really awesome one. Did you end up reading those manuals?
Yeah. Let's say we skimmed them.
Yeah, all right. All right.
Look, I don't have to read a manual to figure out like, hey, this weapon can kill this, and I got to help the guys clean it every now and then. I'm not great at memorizing manuals, but I'm pretty good at breaking systems down into their components and understanding what I need to know about what they do.
Yeah. Love the answer, man. That's awesome. So to close out the professional side, I want to just give you a plug to name any career highlight for whatever that means for you.
Every time we hire somebody, it's a career highlight, and when you're a small business, so every time we win a new job or somebody comes to join our team, those are career highlights, and I'll tell you why. Because everybody's making a bet on me to some degree that our team, our processes, our approach is going to deliver to them. And when that's an employee, that means I'm responsible for helping them navigate a fulfilling career, whether for a short period of time or a long period of time. They're making a choice to join my company because they think that they can accomplish something for themselves out there in the world, and that I'm the right partner for them. And the same thing goes for my clients. Every time that they choose us, they're like, hey, there's something about this company. We're competing against the biggest companies in the world. There's nothing that AECOM or Jacobs or name the big firm hasn't done that, I'm offering to do for clients. I think I do it better because I do it different. I think that there's a number of reasons why. But that client's making, that decision to go with us instead of them. So every day I get to grow is a career highlight because I get to learn from that and I get to build from that. The buying a company and figuring that out. I mean, every day I'm navigating something new. So I really do have the best job in the world.
That's awesome.
I get to build teams, lead people, and go build shit in the world.
Yeah. Love the answer, man. And, typically that would close out our professional side. But you touched on something that I think, that our audience, myself included, would be really interested in hearing your perspective on. You mentioned like Jacobs, AECOM, AKA the, massive companies that you're competing against on I'll call it principal level, for a smaller company, new company, whatever, any company that's not the massive enterprise. What is your, I'll call it entry point, elevator pitch, way of engaging a prospective client to combat the, enterprise company?
I think that there's two parts to this. One is, let's just start with, look, we're led by military guys, and those ethos are in who we are. So we're a mission-focused military leadership organization. That's the starting point. To me, I don't pitch. I seek first to understand. And the reason why most people end up going with the big guys is it's just easier to underwrite risk from a macro standpoint, because it's like, hey, do you want to buy from the mom and pop shop or do you want to buy from, Lowe's? Well, when you return something to Lowe's, even if you used it, they're gonna pay back. Like, all you're doing is removing accountability from the equation, and saying, there's insurance and there's this, there's that. So I'm mitigating risk. I mitigate risk by understanding the problem set and putting the right team in place to execute. And if I can get to that conversation and ask the right questions around that, I can pretty much figure out if we're right for that client before they figure out if I'm right for them. And when I feel like I'm right for them, they feel like I'm right for them. And when I feel like we're not right for them, they feel the same way. So I'm very focused on the psychographic of clients. Now, when we pitch it in proposals and all that stuff, I'm trying to check the blocks to be competitive and not get thrown out, and be a little bit different in how we approach it. And I think some of our secret sauce is by reinforcing that military leadership, mission focused mindset in the tools that we use and in the language that we bring to the table. Yeah. And then to an employee, if you're choosing between me or them, I will tell you, you'll make more money there in the short term. You'll probably make more money with me in the long term, because I'm going to give you the opportunity to navigate your own career. If you have a little bit of an entrepreneurial itch in you, you're going to have a lot more freedom to maneuver here than there. I can't throw money at you. I can throw opportunity and developmental experience at you. And I think that anybody that chooses that is going to be better off in the long term.
Yeah. Really, really interesting answer, man. That's awesome. I was sold on that first portion of it. Where military company approach projects accordingly, especially for build environment. I mean, that's exactly what anyone should want or need managing projects. That's really amazing, man. So closing out the show, we finished with two questions. Let's start with your wellness practice. What does that look like?
So some version of the miracle morning. if you haven't read it, that's by Hal Elrod. Savors silence, affirmation, visualization, exercise, reading, and scribing or journaling. So some version of that. I'm like a 90% solution guy on that. So I'm getting it in 5 to 6 days a week, probably not 7 out of 7. And I'm probably getting 80% of that done, not 100%. So, but I try to mix meditation and meditation, breathing, and reading the Bible into that. I work out. Workout is pretty much 100%, and then reading is pretty much 100%.
That's awesome. And the second part, or the second question rather, is any book or books you'd like to recommend to the audience? You could, double down on that book you just mentioned, or something else.
Man, it's hard to pick one, because I recommend books based on situational, what's going on in that individual's situation. There's so many books out there. If I hadn't said this earlier in the show, I think of books as mentors. Like, somebody took the time to say, hey, look, I had this experience. Here's, whether it's the story I went through or the blueprint that got me out of the story or whatever. There's so much to be learned.
I want to give you framework to it then. So let's do one book that you'd recommend for finishing active duty, one book for wellness, so you could just plug that same book in, and then one book for like professional development, aka where we're at now.
All right. Give me that list again.
Yeah, totally. So finishing active duty. So a book for that time for period of life.
Like getting into the transition.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I should have been prepared for this.
No worries. I skipped the show review because this was part 2. I forgot to give you that again, so that's on me.
You probably did. Again, I don't read 100% of my emails.
No worries. And then the second one was for like personal development, which could be that wellness book that you mentioned, for example. And then the third one is professional development.
I'm going to start with professional development and go with Never Eat Alone by Keith Faraz. I think that especially getting out of the military, I think being intentional about building your network and relationship is really good. So that goes for everybody. Oh man. I'm going to go with Arthur Brooks, Build the Life You Want. He wrote this with Oprah Winfrey. He teaches happiness at Harvard. So for our transitioning vets, go with that, because it's not about it will just make you think about, a lot of things that are not work related, and remove your obsession with the next job and getting the transition right to getting life right. Maybe that's the other thing I would say to my earlier self is it's not just career. All right. So military transition, professional, and one was wellness.
Right. Which could be the one that you've already mentioned.
It could be that one, but I already gave that one. So let's go with Peter Attia's book. What the hell is it? Outlive, I think. Science and Art of Longevity. I think there's a lot of good stuff in that one.
Awesome, man. So those book links are going to be in the show notes as well. Surprisingly, this doesn't happen to me often. I was not familiar with any of those, so I'm excited to have now added 4. Yeah, I'm excited to have 4 new books on my list. Also a big reader, audiobook person. DJ, thanks so much, man, for joining the show, for taking the time. Times 2, right? Two parts.
Yeah.
For showing up in uniform. Love to see it, and appreciate you and your service, man. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Adam. Thanks for what you're doing with the podcast. Best of luck. And if I can do anything for you or your listeners, hit me up on LinkedIn.
Thanks so much, man. To our listeners, BJ's information is going to be in the show notes. A reminder to please subscribe to our channels, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Thanks so much, everyone, for listening, and we'll see you real soon. Thank you to our channel sponsors, Jet.Build. If you're looking for ways to better manage your real estate development and construction projects, look no further. Jet is the command center software for end-to-end real estate development and construction management. That's www.jet.build.